Elena's handwriting had never been perfect, but she pressed the pen with such care, you could feel the effort in every loop and curve. She sat at the edge of her parents' small kitchen table, shoulders tight, elbows close. The paper in front of her was thin and lined, standard issue from the Red Cross parcel her cousin had brought from town. She wrote slowly, deliberately, as if each word might somehow keep her husband alive. "Carissimo Pietro," she began. "Another day has passed and I still wait for your next letter. I imagine your voice as I write this, hoping you will hear me. Mama says you must be in Russia now, that the snow there is unlike anything we've ever seen. But I know you. You never liked the cold. I hope they gave you a thick coat. Please tell me they did." She wrote for 20 minutes. Nothing poetic. Just life. The hens had stopped laying, and Papa was convinced it was a sign. The neighbors. Dog had run off again. She'd sewn new socks for him. She still walked to the chapel each morning to light a candle, always for him. At the end of the letter, she added a small heart and signed, "Tua Elena." She folded the paper into a tight square, slipped it into the envelope, licked it closed, and stamped it. The letters were taken by her uncle, who delivered them to the village post once a week. He never missed a trip, and she never missed a letter. Week after week she wrote. By letter 12, she was growing restless. By letter 20, she was growing afraid. Pietro's silence was like fog, always there, making everything harder to see. But she never stopped writing. Her 35th letter was different, shorter, less steady. "I heard from Giovanna that 2 men from the next village were killed. Their wives received word by telegram. I know you're alive, Pietro. I would feel it if you weren't. Please write. Please. Even a single line. Tell me you're there. Tell me this war hasn't swallowed you whole." Still nothing came. On the 43rd letter, she tucked in a small photograph. It was one of the few they had together. Pietro in his uniform, stiff and tall, hand on her shoulder. She was barely 19 then, half smiling, hair pinned up. On the back, she wrote one line, "Come home to this." She kissed the envelope. It never came back. None of them did. After that, she stopped writing. The war dragged on. Pietro never returned. No body. No grave. Just silence. Years later, she remarried. Not for love, for necessity. A man who lost a brother in the war. He was kind in his own quiet way. But Elena never let go of the letters. She assumed he'd thrown them away. Or maybe the snow in Russia had eaten them like it ate men. She never imagined they'd survived. But they had. And decades later, in the ruins of a long-forgotten military outpost near the Austrian border, buried beneath crumbling boxes and rotted uniforms, a clerk sorting through abandoned war files found a sack, sealed, tied in twine. Inside, 43 unopened letters, all addressed to Soldado Pietro Bellini, 3rd Infantry, Eastern Front, Regiment 452, still stamped, still intact. The ink on some had faded, but not all. And inside one was a photograph. On the back, "Come home to this." That was when the clerk, a young woman named Caterina, paused. She read the return address. San Pellegrino, Italia. She held the envelope in her hand and knew it wasn't just paper. It was a voice, one that had waited far too long to be heard. She decided then she would find Elena, even if it had been more than 50 years. Even if Elena no longer remembered writing them, even if Pietro had never returned. These weren't just letters, they were a promise, and promises deserved to be delivered. Caterina placed the letters back into the sack one by one, careful not to tear or crease anything. The paper had become fragile with time, but still held together as if waiting. 43 envelopes aged and sealed, untouched by the world for over 5 decades. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the floor of the archive room, a blanket wrapped around her, reading what she could through the envelope flaps without breaking them, just glimpses, phrases. "Your favorite dish is waiting for you. Giovanna had her baby, a boy. Do you still hum when you shave?" Every letter was a piece of a person, and every one unopened. By morning, Caterina knew she had to return them. She checked the registry, the return address scribbled on all 43 letters, Elena R. Bellini, Via San Lorenzo, San Pellegrino, Italia. The address existed. It was still there, listed under the municipal records. The house, however, had changed owners twice since 1989. Elena's name was no longer attached. But that didn't stop her. Caterina took the train to San Pellegrino with the sack clutched to her chest, like a sacred object. She didn't contact any authorities, didn't report her find to her superior at the archive. She wasn't interested in bureaucracy. She was interested in Elena. The village was small, tucked into the hills, quiet and slow-moving. The streets were cobbled, the houses mostly unchanged. Number 17, Via San Lorenzo, stood where it always had, painted a faded blue. Shutters closed. A garden in need of tending. She knocked once. No answer. An old woman from across the street stepped out onto her stoop and called out, "You're looking for the widow?" Caterina crossed over. "Elena Bellini?" The woman nodded. "She moved to the hospice 3 years ago. Legs gave out, head still sharp though." Caterina thanked her and made her way to the hospice care home, a small building on the edge of the village. The nurse at the front desk raised an eyebrow when Caterina explained why she was there. "I have something that belongs to her. It's important." The nurse sighed, uncertain. "She doesn't speak much these days, but she has good days." Caterina was led to a modest room. There, sitting upright in a chair by the window, was Elena, thinner now, wrinkled. Her hair completely white, tied back in a simple knot. Her hands rested on her lap, one thumb rubbing the other in slow, distracted circles. "Elena," the nurse said gently, "you have a visitor." Elena looked up slowly. Her eyes met Caterina's. Quiet, watchful. Caterina stepped forward. "Signora Bellini, I brought you something." She knelt down, opened the sack, and carefully took out the first letter. She placed it in Elena's lap. The old woman's hands trembled. She looked at the envelope, then at the return address, then back at Caterina. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Caterina took out the next one, then another, and another. She spread all 43 letters across the table beside her. Elena didn't blink. Her eyes began to water, though no tears fell. After a long pause, she whispered, voice cracked from age and disuse, "He never got them?" "No," Caterina said gently, "but they survived." Elena reached forward and touched one. Her fingers hovered just above the paper, like she was afraid to stain it with the weight of the years. And then she picked one up. She didn't open. It just held it, pressed it to her chest and said, "He was real. They were real. I wasn't dreaming." Caterina didn't speak. There was nothing to add. She had delivered the past. Elena sat in silence for nearly an hour, surrounded by her words, finally returned to her. Then she spoke again, almost to herself. "I wrote something inside one of them. The last one. Something only he was meant to see." Caterina looked at her. "Do you remember what it was?" Elena nodded slowly. And for the first time in 50 years, her voice didn't tremble. "I told him what I'd never told anyone." Elena didn't say what was written in the final letter. Not yet. Her voice had found its shape again. But her silence still carried weight. She sat with the envelopes around her like relics from a life paused mid-sentence. She picked up one and opened it. Her hands shook, not from age, but reverence. Caterina sat nearby, still, watching. The hospice room faded into the background. It could have been 1942 again. Elena read slowly. Her lips moved with the words. Each line unraveled time. After the third letter, she stopped reading aloud and instead began sorting them. Her fingers found order in the pile, aligning the dates, remembering the rhythm. "This one I wrote after the Red Cross came," she said, holding up a faded envelope with a grease stain across the corner. "They said Pietro had been moved further, east. I remember the panic in my stomach. It stayed with me for weeks." She opened the letter. Inside was a pressed flower, long since dried to dust, but still nestled between the folds like a memory waiting to crumble. "I sent him violets, every spring," she whispered. "He hated them, said they smelled like soap." She smiled at that. Then her hand hovered over the final letter, the one she had spoken about. She didn't open it, just looked at it like it might vanish. "It's the only one I sealed twice," she said. "I licked the flap, then used wax. I don't know why." "What did you write?" Katerina asked softly. Elena didn't answer immediately. Her eyes didn't leave the envelope. I was 23. I'd been waiting 2 years without a word. The government sent back nothing but silence. The other wives were starting to remarry. Even the priest suggested I should consider it. She pressed the letter gently against her palm. So I told him the truth, that I was pregnant. Katerina's eyes widened. "I hadn't meant for it to happen," Elena continued. "It was before he left, a few weeks before. We weren't trying. We were still children ourselves. But it happened." She paused. "The child didn't survive. I lost it a month after that letter. Never told anyone, not even my mother." Katerina leaned forward. "Why didn't you send another letter?" Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I wanted the last thing he ever read to be hope." The room fell silent. She set the letter down gently on the table. "I used to dream, he died with it in his pocket, that maybe someone read it to him. That he knew." Katerina nodded. "Maybe he did." "No," Elena said. "I can feel it now. He didn't. It never reached him. But somehow, it came back. And that means something." She looked up at Katerina, her voice steadier than before. "You didn't just bring me letters. You brought me proof that what we write doesn't disappear. It waits, just like love waits. Quiet, undisturbed, until someone decides to look again." Katerina didn't know what to say. Then Elena smiled, small but sure. "I want you to read it," she said. Katerina hesitated. "Are you sure?" Elena nodded. "Pietro's gone. My child is gone. I won't be far behind. But the words are still alive. That's what matters." She slid the envelope across the table. Katerina took it with both hands. She carefully cracked the wax seal. Inside was a single folded page and a small photograph. Elena, young and glowing, hand resting on a barely visible curve beneath her dress. The letter read, "My Pietro. If you're reading this, you made it home. Maybe not to San Pellegrino, but home to me. I carry your name inside me now. Not just in memory, but in life. You're going to be a father. Promise me this. If I'm not there when you come back, if the world takes me before you arrive, know that I loved you in every breath. And your child will too. Always yours." Elena. Katerina finished reading. She folded the letter with care, placed it back inside the envelope, and looked at Elena. There were tears in the old woman's eyes, but not sadness. Something softer. Something that looked like peace. Elena asked to keep the letter near her bed. Not in a drawer. Not in a box. Right beside her pillow, where she could touch it if she woke in the night. Katerina tucked it under a folded cloth, gently, like returning a soul to its body. For the rest of that day, Elena didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. She looked at the letters now not as artifacts of what she'd lost, but pieces of what she still had. Love. Proof. Memory made solid again. That night, after the nurses had gone quiet and the corridors dimmed, Katerina stayed. She sat in the corner of the room, reading the earlier letters one by one. Elena watched from her bed, the faintest smile on her lips. "You're the only person who's ever read them," she said quietly. "They should be published," Katerina said. "The world should hear your voice." "No," Elena replied. "Just you. That's enough." Katerina set one letter down. "But what about Pietro?" Elena looked away, her voice softer now. "If there's a world beyond this one, maybe he's listening now. Maybe this is how he gets them." She closed her eyes, and for a moment Katerina thought she'd fallen asleep. But then she spoke again. "I wonder what kind of father he would have been." Katerina didn't answer right away. Then she asked, "Do you ever wonder what your child would have been like?" Elena nodded slowly. "Every day, even when I pretended I didn't." "What do you think?" Katerina asked. Elena didn't hesitate. "Kind, like him, quiet, but strong." There was a long pause. The kind that isn't heavy, just full. Then, Elena said, "Do you believe in signs?" "I didn't used to." Elena looked at her. "And now?" Katerina looked down at the stack of yellowed letters. "Now I believe paper doesn't forget." Elena smiled, then turned her head slowly toward the window. Her eyes focused on something far away, not in distance, but in time. "They buried those letters with the rest of the war," she said. "Men died, families broke, and no one thought to wonder what had been lost in the waiting." Katerina asked, "Why do you think they never delivered them?" "I don't know," Elena said. "Maybe the postmaster died. Maybe they gave up, sorting the dead from the living. Maybe no one thought a soldier would still be reading." Then she paused. "Or maybe they knew he never made it, and didn't want me to know." That thought hung in the air. "I never received a telegram," she added. "No official word, just silence. That's the cruelest part of war, not the bombs, the not knowing." Katerina stood and walked to the bedside. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small, an envelope she hadn't shown earlier. She placed it gently into Elena's hand. "I found this in the same bag. It was tucked inside the lining." Elena's fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single piece of folded paper. Military stationery, faded with age. Katerina said nothing. She let her read. The handwriting was jagged, but familiar. "My Elena, if this letter finds you, it means I did not return. Don't cry. I had your face with me every moment. I read your letters. I kept them in my coat until the fire got too close. Only a few were left, but I remember them all. You gave me more life than this war ever took. If we had a child, I hope they look like you. If not, just know I died with your name on my lips." Pietro Elena's face crumpled, but she didn't weep. She held the letter to her heart and whispered, "He knew." Katerina turned away, her throat burning. She didn't speak for a long time. When she turned back, Elena was still staring at the page, her fingers wrapped around it like something sacred. She looked at Katerina and said one thing. "Now it's complete." Elena didn't sleep that night. Not because she was restless, but because she didn't need rest. For years, sleep had been an escape, a way to drift away from the noise of the present and back into a world where Pietro might still walk through the door, where letters might still arrive, where the baby she never held might still be waiting to be born. But now, the waiting was over. She sat in silence, her hands resting gently on her lap, Pietro's final letter tucked under her fingers. There was no more reaching, no more guessing. He'd read her words. He'd known. That truth changed everything. Not just her past, but her peace. Katerina stayed in the hallway, seated on a wooden bench outside the door, head leaning back against the wall, eyes closed. She didn't want to leave. Something about Elena's story had rooted itself into her, like a seed too old to grow was suddenly alive again. In the morning, the nurse entered quietly and found Elena still sitting upright. She hadn't moved. Her eyes were open, fixed on the light seeping through the edge of the curtain. She looked peaceful. Still, gone. The letter was still clutched gently in her hand. Pietro's words, the last ones she'd waited her whole life to hear, resting against her chest like a second heartbeat, one that had slowed down, and then stopped. The nurse didn't speak. She simply stepped back into the hallway and met Katerina's eyes. Katerina knew before she was told. Inside the room, Katerina knelt by the chair. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she gently closed Elena's eyes, placed a hand on her frail shoulder, and whispered, "He was waiting for you." That afternoon, Katerina contacted the local priest and asked if the chapel in San Pellegrino could be opened for a small memorial. No family, no formal speeches, just a simple tribute. The villagers came anyway. Some remembered Elena as the quiet girl who used to walk with a letter clutched in her hand to the post every Sunday. Others didn't know her at all, just knew there was something important happening. You could feel it. On the altar, Katerina laid out the letters. All 43. Some creased, some yellowed, all real. In the center, she placed the final letter from Pietro, its pages folded open for anyone who wished to read. The chapel remained, silent for over an hour. People stepped forward one by one. They didn't speak. They didn't ask questions. They just read. A few cried. An old man stood near the back and whispered, "They never sent my wife's letter either." Another woman leaned against the pew and said, "My grandfather never came back. Maybe someone's still waiting for him." It wasn't just about Elena and Pietro anymore. It was about all of them. Everyone lost to silence. Everyone whose words were never heard. After the memorial, Katerina didn't return to the archives. Instead, she made copies of the letters, transcribed every word, scanned the photographs, and created something new. A collection called the I-43. She published it under Elena's name. No edits, no commentary. Just the words as they were written. Unfiltered. Untouched. Elena's voice. Unburied. The book spread quietly, passed hand to hand, read at kitchen tables and schoolrooms, in libraries and living rooms. People found their own stories between the lines. Some cried, some wrote their own letters. Some dug out old boxes and began to read again. One day, Katerina received a small envelope in the mail. No name, just a handwritten note inside. She's with him now, and he's still holding her letters. Beneath it, one word: genius. Months passed. The book made its quiet rounds across Italy and then beyond. It was never a bestseller, never advertised on billboards or pushed by publishers with polished jackets and marketing budgets. It wasn't that kind of book. The 43 spread like truth does, quietly, insistently, to those who needed it most. Readers left messages online, handwritten notes in libraries, letters on cemetery gates. Most were unsigned. Some simply said, "I remember." Others listed names: soldiers, nurses, mothers, lovers, lost and never mentioned again. Until now, Katerina never claimed ownership. Every printed copy credited Elena R. Bellini, nothing more. But requests came anyway. Interviews, lectures, articles asking how she found the letters, what it felt like, what it meant. She said little, because what mattered wasn't how the IT letters were found. What mattered was that they were. One day she received a letter from a university in Trieste. A student in the history department had recognized the name Pietro Bellini from his great-grandfather's war journal, a corporal stationed on the Eastern Front in the same regiment. In his journal, dated January 14, 1943, a week before Pietro was presumed dead, the soldier had written, "Bellini received a package. Don't know how it reached us this deep. A few letters. Said they smelled like home. He cried reading one. First time I've seen him break." Next day, he volunteered for the front patrol. I think he wanted to see her again or die with her words in his coat. Katerina reread that entry again and again. It confirmed something she hadn't dared believe. At least one letter had reached him. Not all 43, but one. Enough. She forwarded the excerpt to the publisher and requested it be added to future editions of the book. Not as a conclusion, but as an echo. Proof that words could travel across battlefields, years, borders, even death. She visited Elena's grave not long after. Simple stone. Fresh flowers. The same photograph from the letter tucked behind the glass frame. Katerina stood for a while, letting the silence settle. Then she pulled something from her bag, a folded page from a reader who had mailed it to her. It read, "Dear someone, I don't know your name. I don't even know if you existed, but your story helped me write to my father for the first time since he died in 1987. I told him everything I never had the courage to say, and when I finished, I realized something. Dead letters still have destinations. Thank you." She placed the letter beneath the bouquet. No ceremony, no audience, just her and the silence. As she turned to leave, she whispered under her breath, "You were heard." And that would have been the end. Except it wasn't. Because one morning, months later, Katerina received a phone call from a museum curator in Berlin. They had recently uncovered a sealed crate in the ruins of a former Axis outpost. Inside, among rusted weapons and half-decayed uniforms, a satchel, a soldier's bag. Inside, fragments of letters. Not Italian, not German, Russian, French, Polish, British. Love letters, Final prayers. Notes never delivered. The curator said, "Your book led us to them. We'd like you to come. Help us restore them. Name them." Katerina didn't hesitate. She packed the original letters, the real ones, not the transcribed pages, into a case and booked the train. She would carry Elena and Pietro with her. Their words had started a map, and now she was going to follow it. The world had buried millions of voices, but the 43 had started to dig them back up, one name at a time. Berlin was cold in the way history is cold, untouched by apology, heavy with what it remembers and refuses to explain. Katerina didn't come as a scholar or a tourist. She came as a messenger, carrying stories that had waited too long to be heard. The curator, Dr. Anke Vogel, met her at the gate of the museum's restoration wing, a converted government building, once full of orders, now full of artifacts. The crates had already been moved inside, the satchel opened, its contents spread carefully across a long steel table. "There are over 80 documents," Dr. Vogel said softly. "Letters, scraps, notes. Some are barely legible. Some were never finished, but they're real." Katerina nodded, stepping closer. The room smelled of old paper and ink that had dried in silence. She ran her fingers gently over the corner of one torn envelope, the name almost lost but still visible. Private James Alcott, 4th Infantry. It was dated 1944. Katerina sat and began sorting. The first letter was addressed to a girl named Iris. English, simple lines. A man saying he dreamed of her freckles, that the smell of oil and gunpowder couldn't cover the way he remembered her voice. It ended with a sentence smudged by what looked like rain or tears. "I want to survive just to tell you this again, out loud." She catalogued it carefully, transcribed every word. The second letter was shorter. Polish, scribbled on torn packaging. A mother's note to her son, written as she was being evacuated. It ended with, "If you find this, I tried." Letter after letter, Katerina read them, restored them. Each one was a life paused mid-sentence, and just like Elena's, these were never meant to vanish. By the third day, she found a letter in Russian, blood-stained, but still readable, written by a soldier named Alexei to his brother back home. He described a woman he'd met near the front, an Italian nurse who smiled at him when everyone else turned away. He had written, "She reminded me of someone I hadn't remembered in years. She gave me a piece of bread and asked me to keep going. I don't know her name, but tell Mama. I felt kindness." Katerina's hands froze. She reread the line again and again. Italian nurse. Eastern Front. Winter of 43. It couldn't be Elena. She was never stationed, never left San Pellegrino. But maybe it was someone else, another ghost waiting to be heard. That evening, Dr. Vogel entered quietly. "You've given these people something they never had." "A voice," Katerina said. "No," the curator replied. "An answer." Katerina understood. When the war ended, millions were left without endings, widows without bodies, children without letters, brothers who waited for trains that never came. Now a few at least would have something more than silence. She returned to her flat that night and opened her laptop. She created a digital archive, Dead Letters Live, a living record. Each letter, scanned, translated, and posted with an open invitation. If you recognize a name, tell us. If you have a story, send it. If you wrote a letter and never knew where it ended up, we want to find it. By the end of the week, submissions poured in. One woman in Manchester said her grandfather was James Alcott. She'd never known he'd written love letters from the battlefield. A man in Warsaw recognized the handwriting on a Polish scrap. "It's my great-aunt," he wrote. "She was taken in 44. We never knew if she made it. They were finding the forgotten." Elena's story had cracked the wall. Now the flood had begun. Katerina uploaded a scan of Elena's last letter, the one with the photograph. Beneath it, she added only one line. Sometimes the smallest voices come back the loudest. She clicked publish, then opened a new letter from the Berlin satchel, dipped her pen into ink, and wrote the name at the top. Not her name. Theirs. The archive grew faster than Katerina expected. Within 3 months, Dead Letters Live had cataloged over 700 letters from 11 different countries. Each one a whisper from the past, each one now digitized, preserved, and, most importantly, red stories poured in. Some confirmed, some fragmented, some heartbreaking. One came from a man in Marseille who recognized a letter written in a child's handwriting. It had been addressed simply to Papa. The boy had been 5 when he wrote it in 1942. The letter had never reached the front. That boy was now 86. He wrote, "I don't remember what I said, but seeing my own words again. It was like finding my heart under the floorboards." Katerina read every message, replied to as many as she could. Some days she barely slept, but she didn't stop. The work wasn't heavy. It was sacred. And always on the desk beside her were the 43, Elena's original letters, now housed in a leather case. She never left them behind. Not in Berlin, not on the train, not even in sleep. They were the start, the root. One evening, while sorting submissions, she received a letter not via email but by regular post, handwritten. No return address. Inside was a small, yellowed envelope and a brief note. "You found others. Now find this." Katerina unfolded the letter. The handwriting was Italian. The name at the top, Giovanna Ricci. She recognized it immediately. It was the woman Elena had mentioned several times in her early letters, her childhood friend, the one who had given birth to a boy during the war, the one who had lost her husband months later. The letter was addressed to Pietro Bellini. It had never been sent. Katerina's pulse quickened. She read, "Pietro, Elena doesn't know I'm writing this. She's too proud. She thinks silence is strength. But I've seen her. The way she looks at the door like it might open. The way she hides letters under her pillow as if they might hatch hope in the night. I'm writing you not as her friend, but as someone who knows what it's like to wait in the dark. If you're alive, come back. If you're not, I hope this letter finds someone who cares enough to remember her. She deserves to be remembered. So do you." Giovanna Katerina held the paper like it was alive. This was no longer just a chain of lost voices. It was a network. The dead had been connected, not just by war, but by each other, and the letters were how they held on. She opened a new category on the website, witnesses, not the soldiers, not the wives, but the ones in between, the ones who saw, the ones who wrote not out of obligation, but out of refusal to forget. That night, she added Giovanna's letter to the archive, alongside a scan of her name in Elena's original handwriting. Giovanna had her baby, a boy. I pray she'll know peace even if we never do. 2 women, one gone, one watching, both preserved. Later that week, an old man from Turin contacted her. His mother's name, Giovanna Ricci. His father had died in a prisoner camp. His mother had never spoken of the war, but one sentence from her youth stuck with him. "I only ever wrote one letter that mattered, and it never left the village." He'd thought it was metaphor, now he knew it wasn't. Katerina asked if he'd like a copy. He said yes. She mailed him the letter, wrapped in linen, tied with twine. 3 days later, she received a simple reply. She would have smiled. "Thank you for helping me find her voice." And that was the heart of it. These weren't just stories. They were recoveries, resurrections of words buried not in graves, but in silence. Katerina kept a new journal now. Not typed, not scanned. Handwritten, like Elena's, like Pietro's, like Giovanna's. Each page was a reflection, not just on the letters, but on what they left behind. The weight of other people's silence, the fragile beauty of language pulled from time. She had become something she never expected. Not a historian, not an archivist, but a kind of ferryman, carrying voices across the gap between then and now. Every week brought something new. A woman from Dresden sent in 4 letters found sewn inside the lining of a suitcase, addressed to a husband who was never declared dead, but simply unaccounted for. Her grandmother had hidden them, believing no one would ever care. Now her granddaughter was weeping as she typed, "Someone needs to know he was loved until the end." A schoolteacher in Croatia emailed scans of student essays from 1943, recovered from a burned schoolhouse during demolition. Many were addressed to parents they never saw again. Katerina read them all. But the one that stopped her heart came from a boy in Brazil, 12 years old. He had read the 43 with his grandmother. She had fled Italy as a girl after losing her father to the war. They didn't know what happened to him. Just a single photograph and a name. Enrico Bellini. Caterina stared at the email. Bellini. She checked Elena's original letters, scanned for any mention of an Enrico, and there he was, briefly noted in letter 6. Pietro, I saw your cousin Enrico the day before he left. He gave me his scarf to pass to you. I still have it. I've kept it by the door since. Caterina's hands trembled. She replied to the boy's email immediately, asked for the photo, asked for any letters, any trace. The grandmother had none, but she remembered something. A scarf, gray wool, with a frayed corner and a name tag stitched inside. She still had it, tucked away in an old cedar box. Untouched for 70 years, they mailed it to Caterina. When she opened, "The package," she cried. The scarf matched a description in Elena's letter 9. I wrapped the scarf around the porch rail. I kept pretending it would move in the wind, and I'd imagine it was you waving from down the road, but it just hangs there. Quiet, like the world forgot. The world hadn't forgotten. It had just misplaced the memory. Caterina packaged the scarf again, gently, and sent it back. Not to a museum, but to the boy in Brazil. With it, she included a translated copy of every mention of Enrico from the letters. He replied with a photo, him holding the scarf beaming, his grandmother beside him crying. The caption read, "My great-uncle is not missing anymore. He's home." Caterina pinned that photo above her desk, and underneath it, she wrote a new motto: "Letters are homes for the unheard." By now, the archive had reached 10,000 submitted letters, more than 3,000 confirmed families, over a dozen museum partnerships. But none of it would have happened without the 43, without one young wife, a pen, and the belief that someone, somewhere, would one day read what she wrote. Caterina closed her journal that night and lit a small candle by the window. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The silence now was not the silence of loss. It was the silence of peace. The letters were no longer waiting. They were home. The final letter came by hand, a man in his 60s, quiet, well-dressed, holding a cloth-bound envelope as though it were glass. He came to Caterina's archive office in Rome, where Dead Letters Live had recently moved. A quiet building filled with boxes, readers, and names stacked neatly like maps of memory. He didn't give his name. He only said, "I think this one belongs to you." Caterina took the envelope carefully. It was old but preserved, sealed in wax, the kind Pietro had used. The handwriting was familiar. She opened it slowly. Inside was one page. Just one. To the woman who remembered us all, you gave Elena her ending. You gave me mine. I was never supposed to be found. We were never meant to be read again. But you came. Anyway, you listened? Tell them this. We were not just stories. We were not just soldiers or wives or names on cold walls. We were people. And you made us real again. For every letter that went unread, for every name never spoken, you've given voice. And because of you, none of us are lost anymore. Thank you. Pietro Bellini. Caterina stared at the signature, her hands trembling, eyes wet before she could stop them. She looked up, but the man who delivered it was already gone. No name, no explanation, no need. She pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, "You're welcome." That spring, a small ceremony was held in San Pellegrino. Not a government affair. No cameras. Just descendants, letters, and the hum of voices rising to fill the silence history had left behind. A memorial stone was placed at the church courtyard, where Elena once prayed for Pietro's return. It didn't say "in memory of the fallen." It said, "to the letters that were never lost." Below that, etched in soft gray marble, were 43 names. People mentioned in Elena's letters, their families confirmed, each one once forgotten, now carved into the earth. Next to them, Pietro Bellini's name, and Elena's. Together, at last. The ceremony ended not with a speech, but with a reading. Caterina stood beside the stone and opened the 43. She read from letter 1, Carissimo Pietro. Another day has passed, and I still wait for your next letter. I imagine your voice as I write this. Her voice broke, not from sadness, but from the weight of completion. Behind her, the sound of pens scribbling, children writing names they didn't know yesterday, teachers reading aloud, visitors walking among the letters like they were walking through a living city. That night, Caterina returned to her apartment and uploaded one last entry to the archive. Entry number 10,001, Pietro and Elena Bellini. Below it she wrote, "Sometimes, love survives the war. Sometimes, silence ends with a letter. Sometimes, one woman writing. 43 times is enough to rewrite the ending for thousands." She clicked publish. Then she closed the Site tab and stepped outside. The air was still, but in that stillness, she heard them. Not as voices, not as ghosts, but as people. Speaking, laughing, breathing. Alive in the only way that matters. Remembered. If this story carried something to your heart, leave a word in the comments that sums up what you felt. One word only. A word that matters. A word that lives. And if you're not ready to forget them, subscribe to hear more voices once lost, now returned. Because some letters are never late. They arrive exactly when someone is ready to read them. Now it's your turn. Write something back.